Hello everyone, how's it going? So Black Myth Wukong. This is one of the big games coming out this year. It's coming out in a few days on PC and PlayStation. The Xbox One has been delayed. They kind of made a joke, or I think it was mistranslated, because there's a lot of mistranslation when it came to this game. It is a Chinese developed game, and Mandarin is their first language, so there has been mistranslation about this game, like the IGN article where they said there was a toxic workplace about one of the developers. I think it was the lead developer shooting out a tweet that was constructed to look like it was kind of very on the edge. I have to pick and choose my words very carefully, and it turned out that wasn't true. It was just a mistranslation, and there's just been this real big negativity surrounding this game when it comes to just people covering it, specifically within the media, and it doesn't really seem that it's linked solely on the gameplay. Granted, there have been reviews. I've seen a few reviews of this game where they say after Chapter 2 there are many technical issues, from sound cutting out, the translation switching back to default Mandarin, and a lot of just crashing. So it is a little sus that the developers made sure that the reviewers couldn't show footage past Chapter 2, where apparently all these issues were having. They can talk about it, but they couldn't show footage, so that has me a bit worried, especially if you bought this game on PlayStation, so you know that the refund policy on PlayStation is extremely bad, so I'm a little worried about that, and there's no physical edition, so you can't take it back to the store, so that kind of sucks. But there's just been a lot of other negativity surrounding this game, and one of the biggest ones with the reviews is this review from Screen Rant, which has been going all over the internet. Now, I haven't read this review yet. I was at a funeral. I wanted to focus on that stuff, and thank you for everyone who offered their condolences. I do appreciate it. But you can see just from looking at this article that the person removed their name, or at least Screen Rant removed their name. Apparently, they shut down their LinkedIn as well. So, first off, there are a lot of crazy people out there who do this stuff where they go after an author or a developer or an actor in the most insane way possible. They threaten their life. They go after them in very heinous ways. So in that case, I can understand where they want to protect them, but based on what I've seen from the clip notes regarding this review, it doesn't seem like they reviewed the game for the sake of the product. They reviewed it for the sake of activism and ideology, which has been a very hot topic within the game industry. I'm personally under the ideology. I personally write reviews when I work in game journalism is based on the product itself. I don't care about the politics involved in the studio. I don't give a damn. I just review the game for what it is. And a lot of people don't like it when you infuse your politics within the review, because naturally so. This is essentially a gift in a way. They give it to you to give reviewers and consumers a better idea of whether the product is worth the money that they're investing into the item. So it just reminds me of like the PlayStation 5 review from Kotaku, or the Elden Ring review from also Kotaku. So yeah, it also kind of rubs me the wrong way, because if I ever wrote a review like that, I would instantly be told by my editor, like, hey, this is not okay, or even the leadership of the company, just, hey, we're not going to publish this, you rewrite this whole thing, and it would also hurt my chances that I would get review copies in the future. And even when I've gotten independent review copies straight from developers like Square Enix, Capcom, they give you a list of what you can and can't do, and I always just review the game based on what the game is. I never do it based on my own personal ideals, so I just don't know why they write like that. It's very confusing, because I was trained to do the exact opposite, always be as independent and always objective as possible. But I've talked long enough. Let's read the review. So, Black Myth Wukong, the Souls-like action hype train. It's a little off the rails. Let me check if I can move this. So, there you go. So, I don't use ad block. I'm just telling you guys right now. I believe that if I go to a website, watching a few ads, it's not the end of the world. So I apologize for that, because people get annoyed about that. In the role of Destined 1, Black Myth Wukong takes players on a cinematic story-driven experience in an action RPG based on the adaptation of Journey to the West, using dynamic combat and skills to defeat formidable enemies, cunning spirits, and the mythic Yagua. Players traverse through breathtaking landscapes, from lush forests to towering mountains and mystical temples. Okay, so far so good. While there are elements of great design by developer game science, engaging narrative, and varied boss fights, especially Black Myth Wukong, also prevents issues that can severely impact the gameplay experience and reliability of the game, taking into account its controversies with the current modern game and audience and expectations of Souls-like games. Whether Black Myth Wukong lives up to the hype is questionable at best. So they put the score right here, so I'm going to read it in chronological order. Or a 5 out of 10 if it's the Angry Joe show. Combat is fluid and fun. Cinematography can be breathtaking at times. Great diversity in terms of items and mechanics. Okay, so far so good. I don't know if I mentioned this or not. If you want to play a game that's like based on Journey to the West, play Enslaved Odyssey to the West before you play this. I think it's like I just replayed that game when I was at the funeral, and yeah, I would highly recommend you play that game. It's like $5 on Steam. I don't know if I mentioned it or not. I want more people to be aware of that game. It's absolutely breathtaking. Alright, the cons. Game performance is unpolished. I've heard a lot of people say that. Lacking in inclusivity and diversity, gameplay becomes repetitive over time. So this is what a lot of people are annoyed about, and I would say with good reason, because this is a game based on a 16th century novel. It's like when people in the media were annoyed about The Witcher. I forgot where I saw that article, where people were annoyed that The Witcher didn't include a diverse cast of people with different skin color. I was like, of course not. It's a novel based on a Polish author's tales in Poland. Like, it's just like, this is a fantasy game based on mythological creatures. This type of person doesn't exist in real life, nor does that shadow dog creature or those like blue demon things. So I don't know what this person is talking about. Inclusivity and diversity. What are you talking about? I think this would be the most diverse game possible, considering it's little people and creatures that don't exist in reality. But okay, I guess. It's in optimal settings. Black Myth Wukong is a cinematic masterpiece with a stunning and captivating visuals that truly immerse you in its world. It has achieved high amounts of detail and beauty in its mundane, as well as vast landscapes, from the reflections in the rippling water to the captured veins on every single tiny leaf of flora surrounding you. It's a shame that due to its appalling performance, it isn't possible to see and appreciate these visuals. These fatal flaws consist of frequent stuttering, severe lag, desynced audio, and terrible frame rates. Yeah, I've heard a lot of that. Aside from the frustrating amount of shuddering, the frequent cutting of audio also heavily impacts your experience, especially during boss fights if you're relying on audio cues. With the recommended specs for the game that should allow for optimal performance, many areas from Chapter 2 onwards are entirely unplayable and become only majorly better when the lowest graphics settings. So they're playing on PC, not PlayStation 5, so I don't know if it'll work better on PlayStation 5 because it's a default setting, but I could be wrong about that, because if this is PC players, it doesn't stem well. Like, there is a notorious history when it comes to game developers who make games for multiple platforms, that the console one tends to be much more stable because it's an exact system. Like, I know it's not good. I should pick my words very carefully, but it's an exact system. Basically, every PlayStation 5 will operate the same, just like every Xbox Series X, every Series S. But when it comes to PC, the infinite amounts of customization does offer a very intimidating factor that developers have to contend with. I could be wrong about that, but based on experience of PC releases, it tends to be that way. Look at how Dishonored launched, Dishonored 2 especially. Not pretty. As it is currently, unless these issues are subject to change in the upcoming patch, I don't see many players being able to run Black Myth Wukong if there is problematic on that recommended stats. Should Game Source fix these issues, it would certainly change the final scoring. This is also something that comes with review embargoes. Like, sometimes people are given earlier builds of the game and they're aware of issues within the game, so they'll say like, hey, this mission is known for glitching out, but don't worry, we'll have a patch when the game launches, the 1.0 update, so could you not include that into your review? We're aware of it, we're just fixing it right now. And yeah, that happens a lot. You would be surprised. So I don't really hold that against the developer, because games are an ongoing process. You can have 1,000 years to fix a game, it's still going to have issues no matter what. Combat is engaging and addictive. One of the best features of Black Myth Wukong is its combat, showcasing an extensive variety of abilities that players can select from and hone. In the main menu, you can put your levels, known as sparks, into several categories. This consists of everything from foundation skills like stamina, martial arts, and survival, to staff stances, mysticalism, spells, and more. At first glance, this can seem overwhelming as players are so much to consider when designing their general combat style, but this isn't necessarily a bad thing, as it allows you to truly customize and create a build that best fits your playstyle. So, okay. As far as the combat performance itself, players only use a staff as their main weapon, which is clearly an intentional move by game science, wanting players to have a pure melee-focused fighting experience with the abilities and skills available aside from your weapon, and with all the varied combat combo and stances that players can channel through their staff. Combat isn't repetitive or boring, but extremely fun, engaging, and satisfying. So they haven't really come to the real thing where they wrote about the diversity combat yet. I wonder if they're going to have a section about that. One unique feature that Black Myth Wukong introduces, there's no blocking or parrying system aside from a spell which cooldown makes you rely solely on dodging. While this is an integral skill in many Souls-like, not having any other means of defense is focuses on player how to learn when to effectively deal damage while keeping themselves safe. This vulnerability adds challenging layers to boss fight, penalizing players who haven't mastered the skill. I don't know how I feel about that. You would think that the main character, given their huge staff, would be able to parry, but I guess they just want to give more opportunity to the player's offensive skill by limiting defensive skills. So they're probably trying to make sure it's as simple as possible. I'm not an expert on the novel, so maybe there is a reason within the novel why the main character can't block or dodge. So if you know, tell me in the comments below. The main downside to how combat performs in Black Myth Wukong is that most light attacks can feel somewhat weightless and static, and can be spam clicked to take enemies down. While this isn't the case with bosses, it's mainly the heavy attacks and combos that feel impactful when inflicting damages from their uses. Moreover, there seems to be no stealth-based abilities that would thematically fit in this realm of this Souls-like world. I would have enjoyed being able to sneak up behind enemies and deal heavy critical hits with my staff, or climb up on higher ground and deal quiet jump attacks. This seems somewhat of a missed opportunity given the landscape and the environmental surrounding you. I mean, you're also playing what looks like a monkey hybrid, so I would have assumed sneaking would have been part of the element. Again, this is based on that novel, so maybe there's a reason. They're taken from source material, so they have to be as close as possible. They don't have the same level of control as, say, an original IP like, say, Horizon Zero Dawn. It's like what Ubisoft did with Avatar Frontiers of Pandora. They can't go wild and just make something entirely new. They are set into a certain way. Again, not an expert on the novel, but I assume so. That's what happened. Black Myth Wukong does not make use of its environment. While Black Myth Wukong did a beautiful job of creating an immersive and stunning, captivating environment with vast landscapes, the main criticism lies with its interactive limitations. The majority of the landscape cannot be utilized, limiting players' mobility and maneuverability while exploring. Considering that the Destined One is a monkey, Black Myth Wukong missed a wealth of opportunities in exploring that would have transformed the game into a much richer and fun experience when it comes to mobility and movement. Well, open worlds are extremely hard to create when you have that limitation. Like, some games have a good way of trying to construct the invisible barrier, like Horizon Zero Dawn has like mountains to prevent that. GTA just, encloses the environment in a way which you just loop around in a way. What's another good example? Final Fantasy also loops around. Elden Ring does a really good job of just creating depth within the world, so you don't really notice any type of limitations until you actually reach the barrier to the cliff edge and you see the water beyond it. So creating that experience for a first time is extremely intimidating, so I can kind of understand where they're coming from when they try to limit the exploration. But a terrible example I would give would be Stellar Blade, because when Stellar Blade, you just go to the edge of the environment and they just force you back by some sort of arbitrary mean. So it's a learning experience, something you can only gain through constant trying it out, like how they successfully did it in Elden Ring or Horizon Zero Dawn. You have to work at it until you finally find an option that works for you. The inability to use the terrain to your advantage and demonstrate parkour abilities is a shame when the world appears to be so interactive. The restriction of movement makes gameplay fairly linear, in which the environment purely serves as a means to get from place to place with pretty views in the background. That kind of reminds me of Rage 2. Like, Rage 2 is a very underappreciated game in my opinion, and the thing is, the linear sections of the game are absolutely amazing. If you're a fan of Doom Eternal, I would highly recommend you play Rage 2. It's absolutely fun. The problem is the open world, while a huge improvement from the first Rage, like the first Rage, that game did not need to be open world. But Rage 2, it is a massive improvement, but I felt like if they just, made it linear, I think it would have been far better and a lot more well-paced. So maybe if they made this game a purely linear game, or went down the route of like Dark Souls or Bloodborne, where it's more not linear, but in a way it pushes you from one place to the next. I don't know. I think a great example of pushing you and having an open world that pushes you from point A to point B would be Metroid Dread. Like, they still had the Metroidvania formula, but the game was designed so you don't really get lost in that game like in Metroid Fusion. It kind of pushes you from point A to point B, and then at the end of the game it opens the entire map to you because you've accumulated all the powers through the linear game structure. But again, they've had experience with that Mercury Steam with the Castlevania games, so they kind of had the ability to craft something like that based on all the other games they made in order to try and build that. Chapter 2 does provide a much more explorative and open space, feeling more like an RPG, but it is fairly vacant, and the Destined one lacks a lack of mobility. Maneuverability and mobility is all the same, but in an expanded landscape on the surface, there is a lot more to see, but instead the environment makes it far more tedious to get to certain bosses while unable to traverse them properly. That really sounds like Stellar Blade in a way. Like, I like Stellar Blade, but yeah, that kind of sounds like it. Boss arenas are equally shallow. Oh god, I really hope not. Moreover, bosses also don't seem to use their environment very much, except I can't even say that name, and White-Clawed Noble bosses in Chapter 1, but even so, to the limited degree, boss areas serve nothing more than an arena. It's extremely constrained to how the arenas are designed, and they appear to have utility, but not at all. Well, not every boss arena needs to be lavished. Like Mesmer, for example, in his boss arena in Elden Ring's DLC, it's just an arena. Like, yeah, it is thematic of what he's gone through. Like, there's no light, he's in the dark, there's no grace, nothing. For someone who fought on the side of grace, it's really thematic of how he's designed. So maybe there's a theme to it of why they designed it. Not everything needs to be hugely dynamic. Like, Promise Consort Verdun also. Like, his final boss fight is more about the theme of the arena, what it represents, rather than utility over it. While Ling Zug, I can't say that name, I'm sorry, does atop the roofs of surrounding buildings, it's just so that he can gain the high ground before lunging at you, which isn't a move that is unique to how the environment can be used effectively. That sounds like the environment being used effectively in the boss fight to me. If he's using the rooftops to lunge at you with that attack, that is environmental addition. He's using the environment to fight you. So, I guess the author's problem is that you can't use the environment, but the NPCs are using the environment, so I don't see your point here. However, White-Clawed Noble uses his environment more effectively, dipping in and out of water and utilizing it in its inherent attacks. Well, they both do. This guy just uses the high ground to lunge at you. I guess the person's argument here is that it doesn't look as cool, which is a fair argument. If it doesn't look that cool, this person's just lunging at me from a building, but this person is going in and out of the water in a really cool way. That's a fair argument, but judging by this entire paragraph, I think this person is making a non-argument about the environment not being used correctly. Aside from many missed environmental opportunities, many invisible walls that you cannot bypass, that's so awful. I hate that. For the game that stresses the freedom of movement, this also feels bizarre. These walls also impact boss fights as well, making their movement appear unnatural and somewhat choppy. Oh, crap. I really, really hope they don't pull that garbage where the bosses can go outside the arena anytime they want and you're stuck inside the arena. I hate when game developers do that. Initially, I thought that the players could take advantage of the environment by seeking protection from the surrounding structures, but this feature seems to be inconsistent. Sometimes a large rock or boulder can block incoming attack from bosses, while other times this won't work, marring the experience and making the fights frustrating. Okay, that is a fair argument. If they do have situations like that, yeah, that sucks. Like, it should be consistent throughout the entire game. Like, water affects rock Pokemon situation. It will always affect rock Pokemon no matter what. I hate when inconsistencies happen. It's because if they throw something at you, you gain an understanding of how that object works. And then if they throw it against you, then you're like, okay, then I can't believe anything you tell me anymore. The environmental choice does not work. Another problem with Black Myth Wukong environmental design is the placement of shrines. This is vital. Rest points are inconsistently placed, showcasing a lack of consideration and strategic thought in how players can most effectively travel. Black Myth Wukong artificially pads its runtime by introducing unnecessary convoluted challenges between shrines, often placing them extremely far away from boss fights, which means you must face enemies along the way. This results in the player entering the confrontations with reduced health or skills under cooldowns, having used them in previous encounters. That's exactly what Dark Souls used to do. Like, Dark Souls 1 definitely did that. I don't remember if Dark Souls 3 did that as consistently. I remember some boss fights, the bonfire was pretty close to the fight, but they learned their lesson. In Elden Ring, they decided this was too much of an obtuse decision. Like, I remember whenever I died to the Bed of Chaos in Dark Souls 1, God, that run back, dear freaking Christ. Like, the boss fight was shorter than that entire run back. Thank God they made you start from wherever you left off in that boss fight. Like, if you destroyed one of the roots... Wait, did they? I don't remember. Like, I hated that boss fight so much. But that is a fair criticism. Like, yeah, I hope that they fix that if that is true. Like, I haven't played the game. Maybe it's not as bad as she says or he says it is. But, yeah. That's something I'm not looking forward to. When facing the Stone Vanguard boss in Chapter 2, you must first defeat several tough enemies within a ruined village and defeat the Tiger Acolyte boss on the bridge. The Shrine at Rest is just beside the next boss arena, but players cannot access it unless they defeat the second boss. Crap. I hate when developers do that type of artificial stuff. Maybe it's not as bad as she says it is, or he. I keep saying she or he, I don't know. While it is typical of Souls-like games to have large combat areas between rest points, as they should, most boss arenas tend to have a rest point close enough to allow for swift travel and to at least provide a way for you to face tougher foes fairly. Well, not always. Like I said, Dark Souls, they didn't start doing that until, like, Elden Ring. Like, again, I don't remember if Dark Souls... I don't remember all the boss fights in Dark Souls 3, but I remember the Abyss Watchers. You had to run a fair amount of distance to get back. Dark Eater Madeira definitely needed to run back for that boss, so it's not entirely true. Like, it's only recently with Elden Ring and some other Souls-like games that they started to be more lenient about that. I know the Surge definitely did that a lot more frequently, where the rest point was much closer to the boss, so yeah. The inconsistent placement of shrines generally speaks to poor game design, as it feels that particularly areas take far longer than they should to get through. Many of them feel a bit of a nuisance rather than interesting and fun to navigate. Some areas in Chapter 1 do place shrines closer to boss fights, which shows that they placed them too far have not been well thought out. That could be possible, or maybe they decided we want to add the challenge. Granted, that does sound like artificial challenges. Like, oh, let's just push the bonfire further back so the player has to go even further if they lose the boss fight as added punishment. But I think losing the boss fight should be punishment enough, because now you have to start from square one. Enemy and boss encounters are thrilling but repetitive. When looking at the field enemies, most are quite linear, possessing repetitive attacks and movesets similar to other RPGs like Assassin's Creed franchise, which are guilty of following Black Myth Wukong. Enemies often wait for you to finish fighting a single entity mover among a crowd before attempting to attack you. I mean, the author isn't entirely wrong. Like, yeah, Assassin's Creed boss fights, they're not the best situation, but they're also not terrible. Like, I feel like with Assassin's Creed Valhalla, say what you will about that game actually sold 20 million copies. They learned from the boss fights from Assassin's Creed Odyssey and made them a lot more dynamic. Like, I think with Assassin's Creed Valhalla, they learned their lesson and just made it a lot more fun. So, again, I can't speak from experience with this stuff, but that generally is how Souls-like bosses work. Like, you wait for the attack pattern to stop, then you dish out your own attack, and then you watch for the next set of moves. Occasionally, another enemy may chime in, but if it isn't necessarily more challenging to fight crowds, when in Souls-like games, enemies are usually not so forgiving. However, enemies do progressively become tougher at a natural rate as you progress through the game, exploring moves, but they still get repetitive. I really hope they don't make that a theme. I've always stated this whenever I play video games, that if a boss fight needs ads in their fight, then they're not a good boss fight. Like, a boss fight should stand on its own merits. Like, even if it's two boss fights, like the Godskin duo, they should stand on their own merits of who they are as a boss fight. Like, if a boss is like by itself, like for example, I used Mesmer for example, if they decide to add some of its knights who are guarding the palace into the boss fight, I think that would have been too much, because it would have diluted what Mesmer stood for. Or like the commander in the core game, I forgot what his name was, but the commander who had two knights standing beside him, I just felt like it valued the fight, because it made it seem like this commander was weaker, so he needed two knights to protect him. I'm always against the idea of putting additions to boss fights, common enemies, because it just ruins the experience, and it just means that you have to deal with these artificial challenges instead of the boss itself. They are also considered to be tougher because they spam attack you more frequently than lower level enemies, showcasing that enemies don't actually fight smart or intrinsically become harder. So they just spam the most powerful attack. I can understand that can be frustrating. I hate that too. Design and choreography of boss fights. Black Myth Wukong is on par with larger Souls-like games like Elden Ring in how boss heavy it is. But then it runs time is about half, if not less. This is because bosses are incredibly frequent and not spaced apart very well, and therefore don't have much build up or anticipation. I mean, some people just like lots of boss fights. I know my cousin loved the Castlevania Lords of Shadow games, like 1 and 2, because they had boss fights all the time. Some people just really like boss fights. Like, despite my reservations for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, like after I played the game on hard difficulty, it had a lot of great boss fights. Like, it just had really, really good boss fights. The game wasn't really as engaging on hard difficulty, because if you failed one, you had to, like, do all the... Like, especially in the chain of boss fights, it can get frustrating, but when I played the game on normal difficulty, just casually on my first playthrough, it was freaking an experience. So, I think a lot of it could add to the fact that this game is a Souls-like, which means there's that added challenge to it. Not saying that Rebirth was easy, like that game was challenging, you really had to know how to parry in that game. Some Soul-like fans may prefer not so much to have so much filler between boss fights, while others like to thoroughly explore and work their way up to a boss fight. Yeah, it's again preference. Their spacing feels somewhat wasteful due to the inspired setting provided, and it would have been nice to incorporate more explorable between boss fights rather than just serving to get you from place to place in a very linear way. As you progress to Chapter 2, bosses are slightly spaced out better, giving you more to do in between, but not much. It is undeniable that many boss fights are fun, challenging, and engaging. Allowing players to use their skills in many different ways to overcome particular opponents. One of my favorite fights in particular was against the White-Clad Noble, a Water Naga boss in Chapter 1, demonstrating a classic two-phase boss fight with a variety of weapon abilities are difficult to overcome. He forces you to time your dodge in perfectly and to learn optimal times to attack. Among the many great boss fights in Black Myth Wukong, White-Clad Normal is not forgiven, and you'll experience the fight in a great setting that you could use to enhance your abilities if you utilize the right skills. The design and choreography of this boss fight have had a lot of thought put into it. Aside from a few exceptions, most boss patterns are quite forgiving. However, many bosses have predictable and repetitive movesets that are quite easy to learn, which can lead to fairly swift defeats. As you progress, there are still many challenging and satisfying fights, and they become slightly less forgiving as you progress into Chapter 2 and beyond. But for Souls-like bosses, they're probably the easiest to overcome. So I'm confused. You said first they were very annoying to defeat, but now you're saying they're the easiest to overcome? Like, this is contradicting what you said before. So, it's... like, is it the boss fights that are easy, or is the fact they added additions to the fight, like simple ads, that makes them much more challenging? I guess they could say that without those ads, the boss fights would be far easier. So I don't know. It just seems a little like they're stepping on their own toes at this point. For those new to Souls-like games, Black Myth Wukong is one of the best games to start with. It allows you to learn the ropes before advancing to much harder ones that truly showcase what it's like to go against bosses that severely punish you for a single wrong move. I hate that. Like, even though I like Souls-like games, I hate when games punish you severely for making one mistake. Like, I still think that the best game to start with would be Bloodborne if you have a PlayStation, because it's not on PC for some reason. But a lot of the things that I learned from Bloodborne, I was able to easily carry over to every other FromSoft game. Dark Souls 1, Dark Souls 3, and Elden Ring. I never played Dark Souls 2, and I started Sekiro, but I rage quit, but I plan to try and play it again. It also worked for other Souls-like games like, what's another one? The Surge 2, there's another game, I can't remember, it's called Redemption of something. That game. So, I don't know. This game sounds like probably a little easier than Sekiro. Stellar Blade's another, I would say that's a good beginner game. If you're struggling with Sekiro, maybe that I can use those skills I learned from that game to play Sekiro, we'll see. There are some aspects of the gameplay against bosses that would be innovative, but unfold quite differently in practice. For example, when bosses use AoE attacks that originate from the ground up, it would seem possible and unnatural to jump over them to prevent being hit, and some bosses it seemed it would be possible and natural to jump over them to prevent being hit. And some bosses, such as the Black Wind Knight in Chapter 1, this doesn't seem possible, which may be attributed to temporary early game bugs or poor hitboxes. That seems strange. Like, if there's an AoE attack that's like something you can jump over, like the reason some Elden Ring works so well with the jump ability is because they give you actually more invulnerability frames for jumping than for dodging. So it's actually more advantageous to jump in Elden Ring than to dodge. So maybe that's something they might be able to fix. Like in Armored Core 6, for example, when you do the assault boost, there are no invulnerability frames in that game. Absolutely not. Nothing you do, it gives you invulnerability frames. So every input has to be done with some sort of motive behind it. But I don't know. Maybe this was intentional. You never know. Many other inconsistencies of this nature seem like they should be accounted for. And other examples, when fighting against the wolf boss in Chapter 1, I'm just going to call it Ling, who performs a bite attack that does not grab or even pierce the player, showcasing a lack of weight and complexity to their moves. Boss seem to be mainly two types, either big chunky bosses who attempt to grapple, thrash, and bash you, or quick, agile creatures that wield a weapon. However, each boss does have a fairly unique attack moves, although they are still repetitive during the fight, and it's fairly easy to learn their attack patterns quickly after a few times of facing them. Overall, in spite of their flaws, boss fights are undoubtedly one of the best features of Black Myth Wukong, providing you with an exhilarating experience. I don't know, like, this person keeps going back and forth with their criticism. On one hand, they say the bosses have some unfair AoE hitboxes. Granted, that could be true, but then other times they're saying they're unfair, but then they're perfectly fair, then they're challenging, then they're not challenging, so which is it? Like, I feel like they're trying to have their cake and eat it too. Like, I have my problems with Elden Ring. Like, I do feel like some bosses have really unfair attack patterns, like with Consort Radon, which actually it's been proven that his hitbox for those blades are a lot bigger than the actual blades. So I wasn't crazy when I was playing that fight, and I was like, how did I get hit? But I guess if you take it on an individual level for each boss fight, maybe that's where they're coming from. Like, the author is like saying this boss fight is like this one's like this ability works for this boss fight, but it doesn't work for this boss fight. It does seem like they're all over the place with this game. If what they say is entirely true, then it sounds like every person just created their own boss fight while talking to one another. That kind of sounds like what happened here. Okay, so now we get to the really problematic part that everyone went crazy about. Largely lacks inclusion and representation. Black Myth Wukong lacks diversity, so let's see what this person says. While my analysis and review of Black Myth Wukong remain focused on gameplay, it's important to mention the controversy surrounding the game studio and the reports of misogyny and sexism from the developers. Let's see what this person is getting this. This article has already been disproven. Like this article actually, no, it's not that it hasn't been disproven. There has been no validity over this article. Like, based on everything I've seen, this came from a lot of mistranslations. And they were also like poking the game studio to say, hey, please respond, please. Dude, like, yeah, this is it. This is like the mistranslation that came from it. It's just like, what does this have to do with the game? Playing as a female gamer allowed me to notice issues surrounding inclusion and representation. What are you talking about? How does being a certain gender allow you to notice this stuff? Like, I'm Middle Eastern, I'm Guyanese, I don't notice this stuff. I don't care. But I'm not a woman, so... What? Like, is that something, like, if you're a girl, tell me? Like, this is something you notice? I don't know, like, I kind of want to text one of my friends and say, as a female, do you notice, like, the surrounding inclusion and representation? I mean, I talked to my friends about this, and a lot of my female friends, they're like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, I talked to them about stuff like this that's been said in the gaming industry, and they're just perplexed and confused. They're like, what the hell? As far as Chapter 1 and 2, while characters are truly fictitious and fantastical creatures, there were no female or feminine NPCs, enemies, or bosses present. Oh my god. They're not real. They're fantasy characters. Like, they're not real. Like, none of these characters are real. I don't even know if you can identify them as male or female. Like, I don't think so. Like, I'm pretty sure a lot of, like, tell me if I'm wrong, but aren't a lot of the enemies you'll find in this game, like, gods and demons? Am I wrong about that? Based on the footage I've seen, they've been, like, gods and demons. Like, one of the creatures was a shadow wolf creature. The only exception, if you call it female, is the boss Mother of Stones in Chapter 2, which is nothing more than a still glowing rock with no abilities being guarded by other enemies. It's called Mother. Like, I don't get what does it matter what gender these characters are? Like, I don't get it. I don't feel representative when I see Middle Eastern characters in games or Guyanese characters. I don't get this. Like, I really don't understand this. Is it just me? Am I wrong? Am I the one who sees the world in a different shade that no one else can see, and I'm just like, I don't know. The lack of diversity and inclusion resonates with the misogynistic comics reported to have been made by the developers, which expressed a disdain for women playing their games. Although Black Myth Wukong does have a truly enjoyable moments, the underlying feeling that a woman let's just read this again, and I'm going to try not choke in my words. Although Black Myth Wukong does have a truly enjoyable moments, the underlying feeling that women aren't welcome in this world felt present throughout my gameplay experience. What the hell are you talking about? No one is saying that. No one is telling you that. Anyone can play whatever game they want. There is no gatekeeping. If you want to play Call of Duty Warzone, you can. If you want to play Black Myth Wukong, you can. You want to play, I don't know, Barbie's Horse Adventure, you can. No one is going to come to your house and strip the game or smash your console or PC. What are you, like, I don't get this. Like, no one cares. When I used to play Yu-Gi-Oh! In high school, I had a Yu-Gi-Oh! Club I used to go to. Guess what? Girls were welcomed. In fact, girls did come to our club and actually watched us play the games. A few of the guys brought their girlfriends. Like we also had like a D&D club. We would literally paint miniatures for Lord of the Rings. Girls were welcome. They came in all the time. I don't get this. Like, it really annoys me because there is no gatekeeping. No one cares. Like, there's, like, even in the past where there was this separation between, like, I know I'm going a bit of a tangent here, but for the Western world, Toys R Us was, like, one of the big toy sellers, and Nintendo had to, like, adapt to that consumer market. So there was a section for boys and girls. Blue was for boys, pink was for girls. So they had to put game consoles in one or the other. So they choose men, naturally, because it's electronics. So they would put the gaming consoles in there, and that's how Nintendo sold their products within the Western world. And since then, this stereotype has existed. Like, no one has cared. Even when I was a kid, no one cared. Like, we bought a Nintendo 64. Everyone was welcome to play the games. It's just like the stereotype, as far as I know, growing up, never existed. Like when I was in elementary school and I used to get Game Boys from people that helped them catch Articuno, Moltres, Zapdos. I was like the Pokemon master in my school. I got all 150 Pokemon. Kids from like third, fourth, fifth grade, boys and girls, would bring their Game Boys to school, sneak them in, and then at recess in the courtyard, they would bring it to me and say, "Hey, you caught Articuno? Can you catch me Articuno?" And I would spend my recess literally just playing Pokemon. Men and women, girls and boys, come to me. They were coming to me with their Game Boys to catch Pokemon for them when I was a kid. I just don't understand this. Like, is it just me? Did I live in a different world? I don't know. I grew up in a low-income area in Brooklyn. It's worth noting that the game is based on the novel Journey to the West, which does consist of a few important female characters. To not include any women or include a few in an adaptation to meant for a modern audience is quite disconcerting. I like how this person is trying to, like, what's a good word? They're just trying to explain this to a Chinese company based on a Chinese novel and telling them you're doing this wrong, and this comes off as like low-key sexism. You're calling these people sexist for creating a game based on their own cultural heritage, and it's just like, it's really awful. This is like if I went to Korea and as a Middle Eastern person and a Guyanese person born and raised in America said, your Stellar Blade game is terrible because it's not inclusive enough. Like, what right do you have to say these things to this developer? Like, it's really, like, this is really awful to say to them. While this does not take away from the exhilarating and fun boss fights themselves, women fans of Souls-like games may have had a different perspective, especially given that, according to reports, the developers also suggest that women aren't capable of enjoying or being skilled at these types of games. Citation needed. Because I have not... Where's the citation for this? I have not seen this. Like, I've seen plenty of girls play Souls-like games in Twitch. Dark Souls 3, wasn't there a girl who actually beat, like, Elden Ring using a DDR map and DDR controller and Sekiro? So, what are you talking about? Again, no one cares if you're a man, a woman, non-binary, LGBTQ. If a game resonates for you and you like the game, you're free to go buy it and play it. Go play Metal Gear, Halo Combat Evolved, Final Fantasy, World of Warcraft. No one cares. Like, I don't understand what this person is trying to say about this. And what does this have to do with the game? This has nothing to do with the game. Like, all the other criticisms, even though I've had issues with something this person has been saying, he or she, like, well, it's clearly a woman based on this stuff, but what she's saying here, this has nothing to do with the game. You, like, what are you trying to say? Like, women are somehow disparaged from playing video games, especially Soul-like games? No, they're not. No one cares. The irony of this sentiment is that Black Myth Wukong is among the easiest of the Souls-like games and may have been overestimating its ability to hang with them in terms of difficulty. Wait, you kind of went... Where is it? Yeah, you say it's easy to learn, but then you explain that it's extremely challenging. I'm really confused. Like, they keep wish-washing in between the difficulty setting, and then this section literally has nothing to do with the game whatsoever. This was mistranslated, and it's just like citation needed for this. Like, dude, if I wrote this, my boss would come to me and say, what is this? They would be like, we're not publishing this, are you crazy? While thematically and stylish, it undoubtedly falls under this category, it also does not fit quite the bill in technical skills required, such as is achieved by games like Elden Ring, Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice, and many more. Look, you can compare these two games are extremely different from one another anyway. So that's... Like, I never beat Sekiro, like I said, but I did beat Elden Ring and the DLC, and I only got to the Raging Bull boss fight in Sekiro, but these are two very difficult, different games. Like, you don't need to be Sekiro, you don't need to be Elden Ring, just make your own game. Like, I feel like that's a really unfair comparison because From Software, even though they've, you know, set the genre for Souls-like games, they make their own Souls-likes. They make their own genre and their own feel and presentation of the games, which allows other games to have their own take on the franchise, like The Surge. Like The Surge's dismemberment system, where you can cut off different limbs and take the armor and weapons from different NPCs and use them yourself. To me, that's an incredibly brilliant system that they capitalize within their game, and it's one of the hallmarks of it. So, I feel like that's not a really good comparison. Maybe I'm wrong about this. While the potential has been one of the... While with the potential to have been one of the next best Souls-like games and portraying a beloved cultural gem of a novel, after the statement you just made, I really find that hard to believe what you just said in this sentence. Black Myth Wukong missed many opportunities as an incoherent issues that must be addressed and fixed to be considered a serious contender like of other Souls-likes. Should this be the case, I would bump up the score to 3.5 at least. While it has some exceptional features, including its visual, combat design, and many extraordinary, exhilarating boss fights, as well as a compelling plotline, it is not enough to warrant a better score, given that most of the shortcomings lie in its performance again with the diversity, and wasted environmental factors that would have transformed it into something great. These are integral features that are fundamental level of all RPGs, especially Soul-like games, should be encompassed in their content. So, first off, the diversity comment, because that's the bulk of what the controversy is surrounding. Who cares? Like, a developer should be allowed to make the game that they want to create. I remember when Hideo Kojima was making Metal Gear Solid 5, and so there were people who were vocalizing how Quiet looked. Granted, the reason Quiet doesn't wear a lot of clothes is because she went through parasitic therapy because she was burnt alive by Big Boss. And she needs to be exposed to the sunlight in order to create the sugars to keep her alive. But a lot of people were complaining about the fact that Hideo Kojima puts, like, attractive women into his game. And then there was also the condition with Nier, with 2B. And it was just like, why can't the developers just make the game they want and allow the market to convey whether people want it or not? Nier sold, I think, like 3-4 million. It sold multiple millions of copies. Elden Ring, she makes many comments about Elden Ring. No one cared about the diversity in that game. Radagon and Queen Marika are the same person. Like, there's a lot of diversity in Elden Ring. In all the Souls-like games, there are a lot of different characters who change genders, who like have different variety of skin colors, different, even just what would be the word? Just different, like, beast-like qualities. Like, the first Elden Lord in Elden Ring was literally a dragon, an ancient dragon. Dark Souls, like, look at that. Look at the variety of characters in that game. Armored Core. It's just like, what does this have to do with anything? And we've seen that this type of forced diversity doesn't sell well. Look at what's happening with Concord. Look what's happening with Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. And there are games that make it work, like Overwatch. Overwatch makes it work because the foundation of that game was to be fun. Like, it was made by old Blizzard, and old Blizzard knew how to make fun games. That's why that game is so much fun to this day, despite the heavy monetization and them trying to wheel back the original concepts. It was built out of love from developers who knew how to make fun games. But in this case, this has nothing to do with the game's quality. Like, the whole idea that she shoved that in about, like, the way she talks is like she's speaking for all women. And again, there are lots of girls who play literal, like, these types of games. Like, so I can see why people are really annoyed about this. And I can understand if the people at Game Science are also annoyed about this. Like, it's not okay. It's really, really bad. Like, you didn't write this review to try and construct a proper argument. I mean, some of it is, but the fact that you included this showcased that you weren't given this review, this code, in order to construct a review that allows consumers to make a credible decision whether it's worth their money or not. You use this as an avenue to propel your own ideologies and activisms rather than constructing an argument whether the game is good or not. So, yeah, it's not a really good review, and based on what you just said, I can understand why people are annoyed about this. But, yeah, this review, this has gone on for, like, freaking, like, 50 minutes. I had a lot to say. But anyway, I'm going to upload this and see what other people have to say. I love to see what other people said. I just said my piece, and that's going to be it for me. God, my hair is terrible. I'm just tired. I'm going to drink some water. My voice is about to give out, and that's going to be it for me. Like, dislike, sub if you want to go the extra mile. Join if you want to support me. That's it for me. Bye.